brew on a hot day, a hearty stout on a winter's night, ale with lunch, lager with dinner, a kegger with friends. It's no wonder this versatile drink is the most commonly consumed alcoholic beverage in the world. With a history thousands of years in the making and an established place in culture and cuisine, it takes a lot of effort to make a perfect beer. Cheers.
As the old saying goes, in wine there is wisdom, in beer there is strength, in water there is bacteria. Beer is the world's oldest and most widely consumed alcoholic beverage and is the third most popular drink overall, after water and tea.
From local pubs to major social events, the popularity of beer has taken over taps across the globe. I'm Judith Jones, and together with my friends from around the world, we're going on a voyage to discover the extraordinary popularity behind millions of people the world over enjoying their favorite alcoholic beverage.
In Peru, Brianna Barnes samples beer dating back to the period of the Incas.
Yum.
Justin Shapiro visits South Africa to see a beer drinking healing ceremony. Katie Hassel visits a monastery brewery in Belgium. Rosie Lavelle goes hop harvesting in Kent.
Slightly terrifying.
Bobby Chin discovers the Guinness legacy in Ireland. And Marilise Parker joins the party at Oktoberfest in Munich.
Although alcohol consumption and social attitudes towards drinking vary around the world, nearly every civilization has independently discovered the processes of brewing beer.
Counting down, the world's top 10 beer-producing nations are Spain, Poland, the United Kingdom, Japan, Mexico, Russia, Germany, Brazil, the United States, and China, currently the world's leading beer producer. However, this does not mean China consumes the most beer. That honor goes to the Czech Republic, where each person consumes an average of 143 liters of amber gold each year. Many archaeologists believe beer was drunk in early times for its nutritional value. It was also considered less harmful than drinking the contaminated water of the period. Keen to find out more about the history of beer, I meet up with historian Peter Hayden.
Peter, what are the origins of beer?
We know that around about 7,000 years ago, mankind was making and drinking beer. We know that from pottery shards that were found in the Zagros Mountains in what's now Iran. People were cultivating grain specifically to make beer. We know it was beer because of deposits on the insides of these pottery shards that can't have come from wine or any other beverage. There are anthropologists who think that mankind stopped being hunter-gatherers and started to become agriculturalists specifically to make beer. The beer that they were making was quite sophisticated. We know that they were, for example, scoring the insides of these pottery vessels in order to trap yeast, so they understood some of the fundamentals of fermentation. They were using very narrow-necked vessels because if you have a narrow aperture, you're stopping the ingress of microbes and air, and also creating a head of carbon dioxide on top of the liquid. That's going to improve quality. So they discovered that very early on. Malting they discovered very early on. And that kind of knowledge persisted right through to ancient Egypt. Beer was a huge part of Egyptian society. All elements of society would have drunk beer, and we would know that they would have drunk it every day. It was a currency. It was a huge part of their staple diet. It was a grain-based economy. We know that they added different flavourings and herbs and spices, particularly date juice, for example, which would have given a flavour, and also added sugar for additional fermentation. They'd also managed to develop quite a variety of styles of beer, which they referred to with different words. So, although there's no connection between the modern word, they had a type of beer called boozer, and they had a slightly more sophisticated beer called cash. The pyramids, for example, weren't built by slaves, they were built by paid labourers, and cash was a big part of their wage. So the pyramids were built with beer.
Although beer originated in the Middle East, on the other side of the globe in Mexico, the Aztecs also created their own unique version of beer.
Oh, Alberto, ¿cómo estás?
I visit the mountain town of Tepoztlan to sample an old Mexican favorite.
Look at this, it's stuck to my hand. That's my tortilla.
Washed down with some ancient ale.
Alberto, I made tortillas.
Should be proud of me. Ya hice tortillas. Okay. Oh my God. And what are we drinking? What are we drinking today? Pulque. What is pulque?
This is the drink that the Aztecs, the Mayans, all our ancestors had.
And what is it made from?
It's cactus. It's pure cactus. Grow it all over the mountains.
No way.
It's very medicinal. It's up to date. It's very, very healthy.
So it's an ancient drink, a drink of the gods.
Traditional Mexican.
Salud.
Salud.
Salud. Let me see. Smells good.
Salud.
Oh, that's good. It's almost like a cider, like a sweet cider. Cheers. Bottoms up. While the Aztecs were producing their own form of beer in Central America, further south in Peru, another great civilization, the Incas, was doing the same. Brianna Barnes visits the salt town of Moras to learn more.
All that salt is making me thirsty. Come here, let me show you something. I'm gonna try the local brew. It's beer made out of corn, maize. First you start with germinated corn. It looks like this. Then they boil it for 6 hours. And then they sift it through here, and it goes down into the pot below, where it ferments for 3 days. And then you get to try some. Here we go. This one, they added a little strawberry in it to make it a little bit sweeter. And to be respectful, you have to hold it with 2 hands. But first you have to give a little Pachamama, Mother Earth. Thank you. Give a couple of kisses. Some breath. Thank you. And that's your chicha. Yum.
Across the ocean in South Africa, the age-old tradition of beer drinking plays a major role in local rituals and communal ceremonies, as Justin Shapiro finds out when she visits the Zulu town of Cape Flats.
I met Emily in Guguletu, a predominantly black township, who took me to her shebeen, or bar, where a sangoma ceremony was taking place.
Come and have a look. That's sangomas inside. Come and have a seat.
What's a sangoma?
The sangomas, they are the healers.
85% of black households in South Africa visit healers known as sangomas. They are consulted about everything from restoring love to serious illnesses and are paid to prescribe medicine.
That is an African komboti.
What?
It's an African beer.
Beer?
We call it komboti.
Komboti.
Komboti. Yeah. Komboti. Komboti.
This ceremony is a healing ritual. The woman kneeling came to be cured from her habit of gossiping.
Everyone at the healing ceremony drinks plenty of homemade beer, which they believe brings luck and keeps enemies at bay. Since its humble beginnings, beer has always been rooted in healing and the spiritual realm. In Europe, it even played a major role with religions of the time. In the Middle Ages, the monasteries were the largest producers of beer in Europe. Because of its nutritional value, it was originally used by monks during times of fasting. They also used it to feed the poor in their communities. The tradition of locally brewed beers in monasteries still exists today in places like Germany and France. Nowadays, it's made on a much larger industrial scale, and profits are used by the monasteries to fund their work and charities. But as Katie Hassel discovers when she visits the town of Ardennes in Belgium, some monasteries still brew beer in the age-old traditional way.
Traditionally in Belgium, beer was always brewed by monks in abbeys. Apparently they were allowed to drink up to 10 litres of the stuff every day. In this abbey, the monks have long since gone, but they still have a brewery here, and that's where I'm headed now. And interestingly, the French word for brewery is brasserie, and that's where it comes from, brasserie, place to eat and drink. This is a real, living, working brewery, and I've really got lucky because today's the day that they're making beer. They only do it three times a week because it's a small brewery. And Frédéric, you're the brewer here, le brasseur, and we're going to chuck this in, this kind of bouquet garni of spices, which smells delicious. Quelles épices est-ce qu'il y a là-dedans?
En fait, on met de la réglisse, de la coriandre, des écorces d'orange, toute une série d'épices qui rendent la composition des bières.
So there's all kinds of spices in here, coriander, orange, cumin, ginger, and that's what gives the beer its really wonderful flavour. Shall we chuck this in then? Yeah? On
Oui,
va
bien
mettre?
sûr, oui.
I have to go really gently. Wait, hey, master brewer, don't give up the day job, Katie.
No, no! Ja, nee, is bitter. Blanc, blanc, blanc. Blanc, blanc, blanc.
What have you got?
Dog one is Trappist.
Trappist, the mad monk juice.
Yes.
Yeah, have a taste, what's it like?
It's very strong.
Can I have a taste of yours?
Yeah.
What have you got, Natasha?
Well, I've got a lighter one. It's called a castle beer. It's a blonde one.
That's nice.
But you know, it looks light, but it's really strong. It's 11%. So
11%.
Yeah,
That's seriously strong.
quite strong. But it's quite nice because it tastes, you know, really sweet.
Have a taste?
Yeah.
You're going to be wobbling home.
I think so.
This isn't the first tonight either, is
No.
it? That's good, I like that. And I've got quack, which apparently is quite famous here. Have you tasted this before?
Yes, yeah, we did.
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah, you like it?
I wish we could get beer like this in England. You're so lucky.
Yeah.
Oh, wait!
For thousands of years, beer had remained a spiritual and medicinal brew. But in the 11th century, that was all about to change.
The Bible.
At the time, the main ingredient used to flavour beer was a bitter mix of herbs and spices known as gruit, which had turned beer into a commercial product for the first time.
Throughout Europe, the state and princes and municipalities had the right to sell and tax gruit, and therefore they insisted that all beer contained gruit. Gruit was made out of herbs, particularly bog myrtle, which also had a certain preservative quality for beer.
But the biggest evolution in the history of brewing came with the introduction of a Bavarian flower called hops, which was first used by the Germans before becoming the new norm in beer production across Europe.
When the hop came along, it was superior in terms of its preservative qualities, which meant you could keep beer for longer, which meant you could travel further, which means you could make it on a more commercial scale. And you also had this time, you had two things. You had urbanization, so people moving from the countryside to towns and taking their domestic beer making skills with them into towns. So you got the start of commercial brewing. We're talking the 12th, 13th century. You also saw the introduction of copper in terms of boiling vessels, so replacing pottery as the means by which people boiled beer. So you got an improvement in the quality of the product, and you started to see commercial beer making as opposed to just domestic beer making.
The addition of hops to the brewing process slowly spread throughout Europe, reaching Britain by the middle of the 15th century. Rosie Lavelle is in Kent to experience hop harvesting.
I'm on a hop farm with Pat, who's showing me how to harvest hops, which go in beer. Woo! Slightly terrifying. Right, Pat, show me.
Right, we're trying to cut the strings that are on the hooks, and we cut just below the hook.
Before hop-picking machines were invented in the 1930s, men used to walk on giant stilts to reach the hops. hop harvesting became a major event, with up to 80,000 poor Londoners coming to Kent each autumn to pick them. Today, most of the work is done by machines, and hop pickers are usually students.
When it comes to making beer, few do it better than Pure, one of the new breweries in the heart of London. I meet up with John Drybergen, head brewer at Pure, to find out about the craft of producing good beer.
Okay, so here we have the 4 ingredients we use to make beer. Okay. We've got our malted barley, which adds flavor, sweetness, color. Then we've got our water. Beer is 90% water. So without water you can't make beer. Then we have our hops. Hops give us bitterness, aroma, and flavor. And finally, yeast. Yeast really do all the hard work. They really make the beer and give us all the alcohol and all that great flavor.
Nice, so 4 simple ingredients to make a nice pint of beer.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I'll show you how we do it.
Great.
This is where it all starts.
Okay.
It's where we take our malted barley and we mix it with water to make the mash.
Okay.
The mash is basically like a magic porridge. It's where enzymes that are in the barley convert the starches to sugars to make a sweet solution called wort. Wort is basically unfermented beer. It's the liquid before we add the yeast, which ferments it out to make beer. So when the mash is done, we're going to take our wort and we're going to transfer it from the mash tun into this vessel here. This is the kettle, and it's where we boil the wort. The fact that we boil it here is one of the reasons why beer has always been safe to drink, because we're basically sterilizing it at this point. This is also where we add our next ingredient, which is hops.
Ah.
When the boil is done, we need to then cool down our wort because it's boiling hot. If we add any living yeast to it, the yeast will die a fiery death, and we don't want that. So what we'll do is we'll cool it down, and then we'll add our yeast. So this is an example. This is what our ale yeast looks like. It's kind of like a sort of beige yogurt kind of looking thing.
Smell it?
Yep.
Ooh,
Smells nice, actually, right?
Do you like that smell?
I love that smell, but I'm a brewer, so.
Yeah.
So we add the yeast, and then the yeast starts to consume the sugars that we've created in the brewing process and producing alcohol and turning it into beer. We've got lots of beer here. Do you want to try some?
Yes, absolutely.
So this is our IPA. It's my favorite. It's really hoppy. It's got great tropical fruit and citrus character.
Yeah.
It's lovely.
Oh wow, it's really good. Really like that.
Told you.
From one of the new wave independent brewers, we go to Fuller's, one of Britain's most famous breweries. Since 1845, Fuller Smith & Turner have been producing highly acclaimed ales.
Beer has been made in this part of the capital, Chiswick, for more than 350 years, dating back to the era of Oliver Cromwell. Back then, it was quite common for large households to brew their own beer.
Over the years, Fuller's has built a reputation for its pubs and beers, with London Pride, ESB and Chiswick Bitter all winning numerous Champion Beer of Britain awards, a feat unmatched by any other brewery. As well as an impressive collection of world-famous ales, the brewery also contains a huge number of artefacts. Adrian Tierney Jones, author of the book Britain's Beer Revolution, reveals more about Fuller's archive.
I love this cart. It's something that Fuller's would have used to take deliveries locally. This would have been going around the streets of Chiswick, drawn presumably by a small donkey. I can't imagine anyone wanting to pull it themselves. It'd be really hard work, and maybe there was a man walking along with it. But people would have seen this and they'd have thought, Fuller Smith & Turner, my local brewery. What time are they open? I fancy a beer later on. Before the First World War, the pubs were open all the time. It was only the First World War they started having the restricted licensing hours. Oatmeal stout was a dark beer. It would have been quite smooth and creamy because they were using oats as well as various barleys in it, and so it had given it this very creamy quality. It would have been seen by members of the medical profession as a sort of beer of great nutrition and nourishment. They used to have doctors writing in the Lancet would actually talk of how good they were for people recovering from illness or something. And, you know, you imagine that now. You could,
I know.
and, but in those days, they were much, you know, they weren't shy about saying, you know, the qualities of a good beer.
With the history out of the way, it's time for Adrian to guide me through the many different varieties of beers on offer here at Fuller's.
Here are 3 of the most common beer styles in the world. Lager, which most countries in the world produce a version of. Bitter, English Pale Ale, which is a beer that's been going since the late 19th century. And dark beer, stout, which I think most people will have seen or drank throughout the world. Would you like to try some?
Absolutely.
This is a lager beer. Try it.
That's very nice. Light, crisp, refreshing.
Very crisp. And it's got a lovely light fruitiness to it, which is due to, in this instance, it's due to the American hops that are being used in it. If you give it a bit of a sniff...
It's quite fruity.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always reminded of Carmen Miranda's hats in those old films from the 1940s. American hops do give these sort of tropical fruit aromas, and, you know, you have it in the not in the morning, but it's the first beer of the day to see what it is.
Beer.
Yeah.
A breakfast beer. It's perfect.
See what it has to say to you. I mean, lager beers are brewed in most countries that have breweries. The best lagers in the world, the ones that have an influence of Germany or the Czech Republic, are classic beer styles. Some lagers are not very good. They're just mass-produced and they're just cold. Right, would you like to try the next beer now?
Yes.
Right, okay then. This is a bitter stroke English Pale Ale.
A little bit more dry, less fruity.
Yes, it is. Really, this is a beer of England. It's cask conditioned, or real ale as they call it. It's warmer than the lager is. It hasn't got that sparkle, that carbonation. The taste profile is a bit more broader. There is a fruitiness to it, but it's more citric, marmalade, Seville marmalade.
Yeah.
And there's, no, we're not going to breakfast beer. And there's also a lot more malt character to it, which is a more biscuity crispness to it. But the dryness is a wonderful finish. Yeah. And why do brewers want their beer to be dry? Because you keep on drinking it. So I'll have another one, I think. Right, for our final beer, we're going to have a stout. One of the another great beer style of the world. Try it first, though.
Oh, yeah. That's rich, plummy, almost.
Yeah, coffee, chocolate, mocha coffee, a hint of vanilla. It's a great complexity in this beer. Stouts were originally stout porters, which was stout in the 19th century, early 19th century, was a word for strength. And so basically porter, which was the beer of the 18th century and a London beer, a stronger version was called a stout porter. But then the word just hived off onto its own, and of course there was a chap in Ireland, in Dublin, Arthur Guinness, who formed, you know, who made what was the most famous stout of them all, which people know about. But this is a great one. This black cab is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
It's so expressive. I mean, it is dark. If you lift it up to the sky, you can see, you know, how dark it is. It's impenetrable.
Yeah.
But then, if you put it up against light, you can see these crimson tints to it. I mean, it is a beautiful beer, I think.
Yeah. On that note, one last sip.
Cheers.
Of all the beers on the market today, stout is definitely the most polarizing. People either love or loathe the stuff. It's brewed at a higher temperature than regular beer, and its unique colour comes from using roasted malt or barley, along with various different flavourings like chocolate and caramel. When it comes to stout, one of the world's most iconic brands is from Ireland, as Bobby Chin finds out when he visits the Guinness Empire in the heart of Dublin.
This house, built on beer. This is Farmley, the home of the Guinness family here in Dublin. This fabulous wealth was all accumulated on the back of Arthur Guinness's stout, which he started brewing in 1759. Guinness has been by far the city's largest employer and its largest generator of revenue.
This is the Guinness Brewery at St. James's Gate. It used to be a lot smaller way back when. Today, it covers more than 60 acres smack in the middle of Dublin City. It's massive.
Arthur Guinness was a shrewd businessman. In 1759, he took out this lease, which is 4 acres in the middle of Dublin, for £100 for 9,000 years. In 1801, the Guinness Brewery developed its West India Porter, which is a much hoppier beer than the original recipe. More hops means better preservation, which means more travel. Suddenly, Guinness was exporting all around the world following the trading routes of the British Empire.
What's unusual about this brewery is that it has its own genealogy and archive department. In the 1920s, it was the largest brewer in the world. 10% of the male population in Dublin were connected to Guinness.
This facility is the old Guinness storehouse and has been converted into a visitor center which accommodates more than 1.2 million people a year. For the amount of traffic they get through this place, the restaurant is remarkably good. And the chefs here very cleverly managed to get Guinness into their starters, mains, and puds. One of the most popular parts of the storehouse is the academy, where you're shown the steps to pouring the perfect pint.
Pull the tap down, slowly towards us.
Yeah.
And now you're hearing that lovely hissing sound of the gas.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to slowly straighten the glass up, and then stop. And then we leave it on the bar here like this.
Okay.
And that hissing sound that we heard is because we've got 80% nitrogen, 20% CO2. Nitrogen is a much smaller bubble, but nitrogen we use to give that beautiful creamy head at the top. This process takes about 119.5 seconds, to be very precise.
119 seconds to wait, just for that part.
To get the perfect Guinness pour all together. So now I'm going to top the beer up. The way we do this is we push the handle the other way.
Okay.
And what this does is it limits the amount of gas going into the drink.
Okay.
And it keeps the head pretty much the same size up to the top. I always look below the glass, see that beautiful dome effect there. Still got a little bit of surge.
It reminds me of a perfect souffle coming
up.
It's
Rising.
The beginning stages. Beautiful.
Exactly.
Across the Irish Sea, Britain was the great seafaring nation of the 16th century, and beer culture was big in the ports and pubs of London. One such establishment was the Prospect of Whitby, which had sweeping views of the River Thames. I meet up with historian Dr. Matthew Green, who's taking me on a pub tour of London.
So here we are at the Prospect of Whitby pub. And because of its location, it became a haunt of ship captains, merchants, seafarers, and buccaneers and pirates.
Should we go and have a look?
Let's have a look. So the interior of this alehouse dates from the 16th century. And as you can see, there's many references in the interior to the pub's shipping past. You can see barrels propping up the bars. You can see chunks of timber masts actually embedded into the wall. This was originally known as the Devil's Tavern. This really gives you a sense of what a typical pub would have felt like back in the 16th century at the time of the Tudors. And in the Middle Ages, up to and including the 16th century, people couldn't actually drink water. You couldn't drink the river water because it was notoriously polluted, so people would drink ale and beer instead. This might be quite weak, it might be small beer, but also it could be incredibly strong, sometimes even the same strength as wine. And if you lived in a substantial house, your daily allowance would be 8 pints. So you can imagine how you'd feel after drinking 8 pints, and not just men and women, but little children as well.
Yeah.
And this was a place you'd come to collect it in pails, but also it was an intrinsically social environment. There were places where you'd come to find conviviality and companionship, and to let your hair down, and to make new friends, to mock old friends. But they were also sinister places in some regard, because they were resorts of crooks and pirates and buccaneers who also came here to scheme and plot. And we can imagine it would have been dark and gloomy, the floor would have been strewn with rushes, they would have been raucous places, alive with travellers' tales and bawdy song.
Ain't nowhere's a lark cat's tail, there ain't nowhere
So this is the George Inn. It's London's oldest surviving coaching inn. And you can see you've got galleries on one side. Originally they were on all three sides. And the reason this is so significant is because these were the precursors to the timbered playhouses. This is originally where plays were performed. All the customers would throng onto the galleries and they would stare down at the pageantry and the plays that were being performed in the courtyard below. And once you'd soaked up enough of that, naturally you'd go and sink several pints in the bar, which is what we're going to do now.
Exactly.
What would it have been like to have a typical pub experience back in the 16th century? Well, there was no beer engine, so the experience of going to the bar and having the ale pumped out wouldn't have been in existence. So you actually had to go down into the basement and collect it in pails yourself. Then you'd bring it up here, and you'd sit here with your beautiful foaming tankard in front of you. It was seen as an intensely patriotic drink, especially when defined against something like gin that had foreign influences. Hogarth famously called it the happy produce of our isle, and he said every sip into the generous breast of an Englishman will inspire liberty and love. By 1710, there was one public house for every 12 people, so it really was a sort of city of drinkers. They had very strange names for the ale and the beer back in the day, things like Father Horson, Mad Dog, Dragon's Blood, and Legs Wide Stride. Lots of them were sort of jokes about sort of going to pee outside in the courtyard. And some foreigners thought it was revolting. One compared it to wash that pigs have wrestled in. Another said the ale was cloudy like the urine of a horse. So on that note, cheers.
Yeah, I'm sure it tastes better today.
I hope so. It wasn't just drinking that went on in places like these. There was a cornucopia of a fantastic activity. You'd see freak shows in the corner. You might have had a little dwarf. They had strange games that were played outside the alehouses. One of the most peculiar was pig swinging, whereby the drinkers took it in turns to grease the tail of a pig and swing it around their heads and see who could throw it the furthest. Whoever threw it the furthest won a sort of gold-rimmed hat. People like you wouldn't be sitting here talking to people like me, because although women could go into alehouses, generally that was to either fetch their husband, who might respond quite violently, or to pick up ale they wanted to drink at home. They couldn't really participate in the male-dominated alehouse scene. From the Middle Ages right through to the 18th century and beyond, this is what it was like to go to a typical London pub.
Another country that's as passionate about their beer as the UK is Germany, where it's also the national drink. Germany is also home to the world's longest running and biggest beer festival, Oktoberfest. It all began as a wedding celebration for King Ludwig I in 1810, before morphing into an annual horse racing event and fun fair. By the end of the 1800s, local breweries had also joined in the party, and over the next 2 centuries, their brews would become the festival's main attraction. Mary-Lise Parker is in Munich to experience this 16-day autumnal beer drinking celebration.
Munich is the capital of the southern state of Bavaria. It's a prosperous city with a strong identity. Every October, the whole world comes to Munich to celebrate beer on a massive scale. The Munich Beer Festival is the original and best. Only beer brewed in the city can be served here. With 6 breweries purveying 6 million litres of the finest ale and lager Munich has to offer to an estimated 7 million people, the 420,000 metres of land around me is surely the spiritual home of the international beer belly. Oh, so heavy. How much is in here? A litre. A whole litre? Blimey. And the waitresses hold like 5 in one hand. Yeah. I can hardly lift this one.
From the 18th century onward, the Brits would lead the way in beer production with a nutritious new stout beer, porter, named after the famous London street porters who survived on the stuff. By the start of the 19th century, with the Industrial Revolution in full swing, Another new beer was about to become the British Empire's largest ever export.
Beer was a very important export. It exported to thirsty soldiers, administrators and merchants around the British Empire. And of course a lot of these places are very hot. India, for example, and heavy, thick, dark London porter is not ideal. So a new beer style was developed in the 19th century, which we now think of today as IPA, India Pale Ale, designed to be refreshing in a hot climate, and it took over from porter in a remarkably quick period, especially as the middle class is growing. Middle classes want to be seen to be drinking something that's a little bit more refined than working class porter. So if you want to flash your bling in middle class England, you drink IPA. In the 20th century, there are two big events that shape the story of beer. In Europe, the First World War crashes alcoholic beer strength because of the shortage of materials. The beers that we drink today are tea compared with what our great-grandfathers would have drunk. And in America, Prohibition had a similar effect in as much as when it was repealed, an entire culture is eradicated. If you think about all the migrants to America and the countries they came from with the beer heritage that they brought with them, it was all stopped. So the American mass market was catered for by a small number of breweries who then had to focus on producing beer in industrial quantities. Making beer on a bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger scale is always efficient. Beer likes being with other beer, and more than any other product, biscuits, cars, whatever, if you can make it on a mass scale, you get much, much bigger returns. On both sides of the Atlantic, that resulted in losing the plot. It all became down to accountants and big brands, and quality, variety, tradition all went out of the window.
Today, the brewing industry is a huge global business consisting of several multinational companies and many thousands of smaller producers like brew pubs and regional breweries. Advances in transport and commerce have created an international marketplace where the consumer literally has hundreds of choices between regional, local, foreign and national beers.
Branding is absolutely vital to any brewer, whether you're small or large. However, for a large international brewer, it's absolutely important to get your branding right, because your customer base could be millions of people spread across 4 or 5 continents.
I have an announcement to make. I, Cantona, will swim the English Channel to Britain. If you agree that Kronenbourg is the supreme tasting beer in the world.
How much is it about the taste and how much is it about branding?
If you want to build up a generation of followers, you ultimately have to have a beer that has the taste that the customers want.
Little Ripper. In 1888, William and Ralph Foster gave Australia its first taste of true refreshment. Foster's, good call since 1888.
So how do these multinational companies keep their fans?
I think they probably start to associate over a longer period of time with lifestyle, football, motorsports, tennis, you know, anything that gets a large audience around the world. I mean, what we have here, say, with Carlsberg, is an image that's recognised probably on every continent on the planet. The hardest thing for a big multinational to do with its branding is change its imagery. It's like trying to turn an oil tank around. You can't do it quickly. So they are trying to survive, I think, by buying up some of the new entrants into the market to add to their imagery, or they are trying to adopt the ideology of a craft brewer themselves, and they're sort of making themselves sort of as a rock and roll of beer.
You'd have to go back 70 years to find as many breweries in the UK as we have now. From genuine Czech-style pilsners and golden ales to zingy India pale ales and imperial stouts. We have such an incredible variety of beers today that if you think you don't like beer, you probably haven't found the right one yet.
In the heart of London, under the arches in Bermondsey, microbreweries are popping up everywhere. I meet up with craft beer blogger Nathan Nolan, who gives me a tour of Bermondsey's Beer Mile.
Judith, I've brought you here to Bermondsey because we've got 4 craft breweries just within this short stretch of railway line along here. And Bermondsey's really come to typify the craft beer movement here in London.
So what is craft beer? Where did it come from?
Well, as we know it now, craft beer in its present form is really believed to come out of the US in the late 60s. Now, it was people that were tired of mass-produced beers that lacked flavor, that lacked character, and what they were able to produce were beers in small batches that had these dynamic flavors and tastes that were new and exciting, and this really is what kicked the whole thing off. So this is the Southwark Brewery. It's the newest brewery in Bermondsey. Now, Peter, who started it up in 2015, specializes in traditional cask English ales.
How strong is the craft beer movement in London?
Well, if you consider in 2006, there were only 9 breweries left in London. And now today, we're up over 70. So it's the most breweries we've had in London for about 80 years, which is incredible. In the UK, we had 500 breweries in 2000. Now we've got over 1,400 breweries in the UK. And the UK actually has the most breweries than any other country in the world per capita. It is.
And how has that come about then?
It's sort of a change in people's desire for getting back to what they did really well, which was brewing. Britain, the UK has an incredible brewing history, and it's rediscovering these great recipes, these old styles of beer, like this XXX Porter, which was the biggest beer in London, a beer invented in London, nearly died out. It was almost extinct. It's been revitalized here in London, this fabulous dark beer style. This is Anspach in Hobday, another craft brewery here in Bermondsey. And the founders started out as home brewers, like a lot of brewers in America and here and all over did.
I get the point now. I mean, craft beer has really taken off. So where do you see the future of craft beer?
Interestingly, the future is kind of the past. We're kind of coming back to the way things used to be. Smaller breweries making more handcrafted beers. There's a lot more experimentation though. Social media, collaborations between breweries. Beers being made by a brewery in New Zealand getting together with a brewery in the US. And then the other exciting thing is hops. Hops are being developed at an amazing rate. New kinds of hops, new varieties, new strains to develop more interesting, more exotic flavors. Plus the rise of cans. We used to see cans as a really cheap way to package beer, but now cans are seen as this fantastic way of preserving beer in a better way than some people think bottles do. Yeah. So it is, it's an exciting time, and who knows where we'll be in 5 or 10 years.
With the future of beer sorted, we head to the local bottle shop to see what craft beers are on offer to take home.
This is the bottle shop. It's also in the Arches here in Bermondsey. It is, as you can see, a working tap room and a bottle shop. And as the name suggests...
What a selection!
Yeah, look, and it's not just beers from the US and the UK. It's beers from Scandinavia, from New Zealand, from Australia. And look how full this place is. You know, and this isn't just London where this is happening. It's not limited to here. It's New York, it's Los Angeles, Tokyo, it's Copenhagen, it's Rome. Yeah. This isn't limited to these traditional brewing nations. We've got Scandinavia and Italy, Spain, these places where people are developing these interesting beers, bringing their own personality with different hops and malts and different takes, and it's just as diverse as anything else we've ever seen.
For centuries, if you asked a restaurant server what drink to pair with a certain dish, he'd bring over the sommelier and a wine bottle negotiation would ensue. But in the last 5 years, beer has made it on the menu as more than just an afterthought. Chefs, beverage directors, and wine lovers alike have learned the ability that beer can be paired with all kinds of foods.
In 1999, Michelin star chef Sriram Iyer opened Quilon, which won the Best Indian Restaurant Award in 2001. Joining Sriram is another Michelin-starred chef, Alan Williams from the Westbury in Mayfair. Both are preparing dishes which are going to be paired with the appropriate beer. I meet up with food and beer expert Melissa Cole to find out what craft beers she's chosen to go with a fine dining experience. First up is Alan's mix of two different types of beef, roasted sirloin and beef tartare, which is accompanied by an oyster emulsion and served with Bovril potatoes and turnips.
To go with Alan's beef dish, we've got modus operandi, which is from the Wild Beer Co., which is a barrel-aged and it's also a slightly sour beer, so it'll have a nice acidity to cut through all the lovely rich elements of the beef.
I'm surprised at how well this beer is paired with the beef. As a beer on its own, it's a bit in your face for me, but you got that initial hit of the sourness, but underneath it, especially when you're eating it, you've got real depth, real character too.
Well, it's certainly a lot more sour than I expected, but it actually pairs really well with the rich beef and the rich sauce. It's very nice.
And once you get past that sourness, you've got an effect of the oak aging, you've got a bit of sherry flavour going on in there. It's a really rich and complex beer.
Yeah. Now it's Sriram's turn to step up to the plate with a signature dish from his kitchen. Malabar lamb biryani, chicken curry, pineapple pachari, and sugar snaps and asparagus with a coconut and mustard dressing.
The reason why I chose this is well, A, it's the most astonishing beer. It's a Fuller's Vintage 2009. It's a malt-led beer. And as opposed to just saying, oh, I'll choose an IPA because it's got Indian in the name, actually it's one of the worst things you can do. Hops will exacerbate heat, so you don't want to do that. It's also much more elegant and rounded and complex with these orange and marmalade and brioche and slightly minty finish that it's got than putting just a bog standard lager on the table as well. So it's something really quite special.
This beer kind of makes it really interesting to give it that fantastic, rich taste, and actually also works to clean your palate in a way.
Almost brings everything together with its depth, with its fruit, with the spice. It's just beautiful, beautiful pairing.
Can I just say, wow, I've never had a vintage ale before, and this is seriously my favourite beer I've had yet. This is really, really nice. Delicious, yeah.
Fantastic.
For our final course, Sriram serves up a delightful dessert of pistachio cake and ice cream, served with a black sesame sauce.
We've got two beers here just to show how you can complement and contrast. We've got kind of a real sort of sweety, almost soda-y drink, which is the Leafman's Fruitess. And then we've got the Seven Surge, which is a lovely roasty porter.
What I love about these two beers with this dish is the complete contrast. With a Fruitess, you turn it into a Tutti Frutti, and with the porter, turns full circle and you've got a really nutty, toasty flavoured dessert instead. So it's almost two different desserts in one.
I'm really, really glad to know that beers go very well with food. Thank you for introducing me to such wonderful dishes and great beer. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Beer has been a staple in the lives of people around the world for hundreds of years. Beer lovers are enjoying their favourite alcoholic beverage more now than ever before, thanks to both producers and consumers who are choosing quality over quantity.
Pubs and bars are the ultimate social interaction hubs where old friends meet and new friends are made.
And in the 21st century, as the craft beer revolution takes hold, beer is more popular than ever.